Here's a question. Is India the youngest country in the world? Politicians love to say that India is the youngest country in the world, and by sheer numbers it is. But by ratio, it really isn't. This dilemma is the reason I made this video. So let's start by looking at the different population statistics of people below 15 years of age. Let me clarify something before we begin. Look at this chart. This is 5 countries' population that is below 15 years of age. Now let's focus only on 2 countries, Niger and India. Niger has a puny 10 million children to India's massive 372 million. There is just no comparison. Now watch closely as we shift to ratio. How many children are there relative to the country's population? The Niger graph just shoots up to 50%, while India's graph remains at a still high 28%. But by sheer ratio, we just can't compare. In a population of 20 million people, 50% are children in Niger. This means you can get pretty confused unless you examine both factors, the magnitude and the ratio. Alright, so let's compare the number of children in India to that of other countries that I have chosen. Again, India remains comfortably on top. All of the countries on the left hand side have still decent populations below 15. Then, looking at the right hand side, Norway has a tiny 930,000 children below 15 years of age. As is evident, just looking at these numbers doesn't make any sense unless we are able to compare them to the total population. Now the data we saw starts making more sense. As we have seen, Niger remains unbeaten at a whopping 50% of its population being children. The developing countries of India, Brazil and Mexico have similar ratios. Pakistan is a little higher than India due to interesting reasons which we don't have time to examine in this video. Going to the right hand side, the more developed countries all have essentially the same ratio. Though Norway has just 900,000 children, that is still 18% of its entire population. And though China has a whopping 245 million children, they are still just 18% of China's massive population. Let's get an even better understanding of population of children around the world by looking at the countries arranged in descending order, rather than ones that I had chosen to be comparable specifically to India. We have the top 10 countries as follows. Looking at the comparison, India sits firmly on top with 372 million children, China in second place with 245 million. The next is quite normal, mostly some of the countries with the highest total populations. Democratic Republic of Congo brings up the rear as the 10th country. So this graph is pretty much as we'd expect. No surprises. So coming to the population by magnitude awards, number 3 is Nigeria, followed by China on the second spot and India taking the number 1 spot. India having the most youth. This is an often highlighted fact, but all of this was in magnitude. So let's see how many of these countries are in the ratio list. The top 10 countries with ratio of number of children to total population are: only Democratic Republic of Congo is repeated. All others are new countries we haven't seen on the previous list. Looking at the comparison, Niger has a whopping 50% of the population below 15, and all the other top 10 countries bottom out at 45% of their population being children. And when you look at all of these countries, you realize one big thing. They are all in Africa. Every single one of the youngest countries in the world is African. The Gambia, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, all in the western parts, Angola, Congo, Burundi, Uganda in the central parts, and lastly Somalia. These aren't the only African countries to have the youngest populations, by the way. So coming to the ratio awards, Uganda on third, Mali on second, and Niger on first make up the top of population by ratio. India is already off the list on the second list. We have a total of 6 lists, by the way, and spoiler alert, India tops only one of these.